A lone American nurse was left for dead in the burning deserts of Iraq, her hands tied, her radio smashed, her body broken. The terrorists who took her planned to make her suffering a message to the world, but they made one fatal mistake. They didn't know about him. A Navy SEAL named Jake Walker, operating deep behind enemy lines. And he wasn't alone. Beside him was Shadow, his loyal K-9 partner, trained to find the lost and protect the living. Together, they would defy the storm, the sand, and death itself to bring her home. Before we begin, tell us where you are watching from, and if this story touches your heart, please subscribe for more stories of courage, loyalty, and faith. The afternoon sun bled across the horizon, turning the sands of Fallujah into molten gold and shadow. Inside the makeshift field hospital on the outskirts of the city, the heat clung to everything. The air, the beds, the human breath struggling against dust and despair. Lieutenant Lucy Adams, 32, moved between the cots like a ghost made of grace and exhaustion. Her hair, once honey blonde, was now tied into a rough bun streaked with sand and sweat. Her pale skin had long lost the softness of civilian life. The desert had etched it with fine lines of sleeplessness and grit. She was tall and lean, her movements steady, her green eyes tired yet unbroken. Lucy had learned early in the war that the only way to survive chaos was to serve through it. She never raised her voice, even when the chaos around her screamed. The field hospital was half tents, half ruins. The floor was sand. The walls were patched canvas. Machines hummed weakly from a generator that coughed more smoke than power. She bent over a small boy with a shrapnel wound on his arm, murmuring softly as she cleaned it. The boy, no more than 8, watched her with wide brown eyes filled with confusion and fear. "You'll be okay," she whispered. "You're brave, little one." Her voice carried calm like a prayer. Behind her, 2 orderlies argued in low voices about the incoming wounded. They were young Marines, faces reddened by heat and fear, both glancing too often toward the road, where explosions sometimes bloomed like hateful flowers. Lucy ignored them, focusing on the child's trembling arm. Her hands were steady even as the ground beneath her seemed to hum with distant artillery. She had been here for 18 months, longer than anyone thought she could last. Her faith in humanity was bruised, but not destroyed. She still wrote letters home, to no one in particular now, since her fiancé, a military doctor named Aaron Blake, had died 3 years earlier in an ambush outside Mosul. She never mailed those letters. They were folded carefully and kept in her uniform pocket, pages filled with words she couldn't say aloud. "I'm still here. I still hear you when the wind moves through the tents." That wind came again now, rising from the desert as a distant rumble turned into a roar. A flash split the air, white and soundless at first. Then the earth lifted. The explosion tore through the hospital compound like the hand of a god. The blast threw Lucy across the room, her body colliding with a cot, metal and screams tangling into one violent instant. Dust swallowed light. She couldn't breathe. Someone shouted in Arabic, another in English. Then silence. When she woke, her head throbbed, her mouth tasted of metal and blood. Around her, the tents were gone. Only scattered poles and twisted canvas remained. She saw bodies. Too many. She tried to crawl toward the small boy, but strong hands seized her shoulders. A man's voice barked in Arabic. Through the haze she saw faces, bearded, wrapped in scarves, rifles glinting. One man stepped forward, taller than the rest, eyes dark like obsidian. Abdul Rahim, their leader. He wore a white tunic beneath a black vest, and his face bore the solemn calm of a man who believed his cruelty was holy. "You saved the children of America," he said in broken English. "Let us see if your God will save you." Lucy stared back, refusing to cry. The heat from the burning wreckage pressed against her skin. She whispered a single word, "Please," but it was not for him. It was a prayer into the smoke. They bound her wrists and covered her eyes. She heard other survivors begging, footsteps dragging through sand. The smell of gasoline filled the air. Then the unmistakable click of cameras, propaganda. Someone struck her cheek when she tried to speak. Her world became the sound of trucks starting, voices fading, and the hollow ring of her dog tags against her chest as she was thrown into the back of a vehicle. 50 miles west, under the pale fire of sunset, Jake Walker watched the desert shift through the haze of his scope. The 38-year-old Navy SEAL had a face carved from hard years, sunburned skin, stubble that never quite became a beard, and eyes like blue steel, cold, steady, and sad. His build was lean, but coiled with power, the kind that came from years of carrying too many regrets. Jake's uniform was dusted with sand, and the American flag patch on his sleeve had faded to gray. Beside him sat Shadow, a 5-year-old German shepherd with black and tan fur, broad shoulders, and intelligent amber eyes. The dog's ears twitched constantly, scanning the air. He was quiet, disciplined, but when Jake moved, his gaze followed like a second heartbeat. Jake had served for nearly 2 decades, through places the world had forgotten and wars that blurred into each other. His last mission had left him with a limp and a scar across his ribs, the price of saving 3 men from a collapsing compound. His fiancée, Claire, had not been one of the survivors that year. She had died waiting for him at a military hospital that was bombed before he could arrive. Since then, Jake had preferred the silence of missions that no one else would take. Silence was safer than people. The radio on his vest crackled. A voice came through, broken by static. "Reaper Base, this is command. Be advised, field hospital east of Fallujah destroyed in blast. Multiple casualties. Lieutenant Lucy Adams, status unknown." Jake froze. He recognized the name. He'd heard it once in a briefing months ago, the nurse who refused to leave her post. He had never met her, but soldiers spoke of her as if she were light itself in a place without sun. He felt something inside him shift, an ache he hadn't let himself feel in years. He reached up and turned the volume higher. The commander's voice continued, grim and resigned. "Sandstorm inbound. All units stand down. No rescue ops authorized until weather clears." Jake looked toward the east. The horizon was bleeding red, the sky thick with the birth of a storm. A wall of sand rose like an ocean wave miles away. The wind carried its warning, a low, ancient howl. Shadow growled softly, sensing his handler's tension. Jake's fingers tightened around his dog's collar. "Another angel lost to this damn desert," he muttered. He felt the old guilt crawl up his spine, the same guilt that had whispered in every quiet night since Claire's death. The kind that told him he should have been faster, stronger, more. He pulled off his gloves and rubbed the back of Shadow's neck. The dog leaned into his touch, eyes never leaving the horizon. Jake whispered, "You smell it too, don't you? The world's going to hell again." He stared at the storm. He could obey the order, wait it out, let the storm bury what was left of her. Or he could do what he always did when God or men turned their backs. Move. He turned off his radio. The silence was sudden, almost holy. He stood, slinging his rifle and checking his gear. The wind stung his eyes, but he didn't blink. He crouched beside Shadow, placing a gloved hand on the dog's chest. "Let's bring her home." Shadow's tail gave a single, tight wag. Acknowledgement, not joy. Jake rose, the desert stretching infinite before him. The first gust of sand hit, coating his uniform, filling the cracks of his armor, stinging his skin. He lowered his goggles, pulled up his scarf, and stepped forward. Behind him, the wind erased his footprints almost instantly. The sky darkened to rust, lightning flickering like veins through the storm. From a distance, they looked like 2 shadows swallowed by the breath of the earth itself. 1 man and 1 dog walking into the red heart of the desert, where every sound was lost except the echo of their resolve. The sand screamed, the world vanished, but they did not stop. The night fell over the ruins like a suffocating shroud. The remains of the old Iraqi village lay half buried in sand, its walls chipped by time and shrapnel. Lanterns burned low, painting trembling circles of light over the cracked ground. Inside what was once a schoolhouse, now a makeshift stronghold, Lucy Adams sat on her knees beside a man groaning from a gunshot wound. Her wrists were still bound with frayed rope, the fibers digging into her skin, but she worked with the calm precision of someone who had spent too many nights like this, between mercy and fear. Her hair was disheveled, strands sticking to her temples with sweat. The khaki uniform she had been wearing was torn and dust-streaked, one sleeve missing entirely. The wound she was treating was deep, on the thigh of a young fighter barely 20, his face hidden behind a dirty scarf. He trembled with pain and shame. The others, 6 armed men, watched from the shadows, muttering in Arabic, their rifles resting across their knees. From the far end of the room, Abdul Rahim watched her with quiet contempt. His dark eyes, framed by deep creases and the edge of a keffiyeh scarf, glowed like coal above a face that never smiled. He was a tall man, gaunt but powerful, with a kind of fanatic stillness that frightened even his men. The lamplight made his sharp nose and hollow cheeks appear carved from stone. "You see, my brothers," he said in accented English, his voice low and cold, "even the angels of America bleed. They serve their false god of medicine, not faith." He took a step closer, boots crunching over broken plaster. "You heal my soldier now, woman. Heal him, and then we shall see if your God comes for you." Lucy didn't answer. She only pressed harder on the wound, stopping the bleeding with a strip of her own torn sleeve. Her hands shook slightly, not from fear, but exhaustion. She met Raheem's gaze briefly, her green eyes dull from dust but defiant. "I don't heal for nations," she said softly. "I heal because I can." Raheem's jaw flexed, the faintest flicker of confusion passing across his face before turning back into disdain. He waved a hand. "Finish it." Then he walked out into the courtyard, his long robe sweeping the sand behind him. Lucy exhaled slowly, then leaned close to the young fighter. His hands were trembling as he whispered, You saved me before." His English was broken, but the memory in his voice was clear. Lucy frowned, her mind flicking back. The same boy, perhaps, who had been brought into her field hospital weeks ago with a chest wound. She had patched him up, told him he would live. She remembered his wide brown eyes and his whispered, "Shukran, thank you." Now those same eyes were filled with confusion and guilt. "Why are you here?" he murmured. She whispered, "Because you brought me here." Then, with deliberate care, she folded a small silver badge, her nurse's insignia, into the inner seam of her torn pocket, hiding it like a secret prayer. Outside, the wind rose, sweeping across the ruined rooftops like a ghost's sigh. The men began preparing for the night's ritual. The camera, the flag, the rhetoric. Lucy sat quietly as the young fighter avoided her gaze. He was trembling, not from fever, but conscience. His name, she would later learn, was Yusuf, barely 19, thin, his face scarred by a burn along his left jaw, a mark from the explosion that had first brought him to her care. Raheem returned, carrying an old camcorder in one hand. "Tomorrow we will show the world that mercy dies with the West," he said, setting it down on a crate. He looked at Lucy as if she were already dead. "You will speak before the sun rises. Then you will meet your God." He turned to Yusuf. "Prepare her." Yusuf hesitated, swallowing hard. She is weak, Commander. She can barely stand." Raheem's voice dropped. "Then she will kneel." He left again, barking orders to his men outside. The wind shifted, carrying the faint smell of gasoline and sweat. Lucy closed her eyes. Her lips moved soundlessly, forming a prayer only she in the desert could hear. "If you still hear me, send a soul to find me." Miles away, Jake Walker and Shadow stood atop a ridge, staring into the night's endless stretch of sand. The storm had passed, leaving a strange clarity in the air, every sound sharp, every shadow alive. Jake's GPS was dead, its screen flickering with static. The radio was silent, its antenna bent by wind, but Shadow was restless. The dog's nose worked furiously, pacing in short bursts, tail low, ears swiveling. His amber eyes glowed faintly in the moonlight. Jake wiped sand from his face, his skin raw under the scarf. His body ached from the long march, and the silence pressed on him like a weight. He crouched beside Shadow. "What do you smell, buddy?" The dog gave a low whine, nose pressed to the ground, then lifted his head eastward. Jake followed his gaze. Nothing but dunes and the faint trace of smoke in the distance. He muttered, "All right, boy, lead the way." They moved together, man and dog, shadows crossing the sand. Jake's thoughts wandered as his boots sank into the soft ground. He remembered the day he had first been assigned to K-9 duty, years ago, a punishment for disobeying a superior's order during a civilian rescue. He had risked his life to save a group of trapped locals instead of pulling back as commanded. The officer called him reckless. But the K-9 unit saw something else, instinct guided by empathy. They gave him Shadow, then a 1-year-old pup, stubborn but brilliant. Over 5 years, they had become one being split between two bodies. Jake thought of that now, watching the dog move ahead, silent, certain. "You always know where to go," he murmured. They followed the faint smell of oil and blood, invisible to Jake but clear to Shadow. The dog paused occasionally, sniffed, adjusted course, and moved again. Hours passed. The temperature dropped sharply, the cold biting into Jake's bones. The desert by night was not golden. It was gray, endless, and cruelly beautiful. At one point, they found a wreck, a burned military truck half buried in sand. Jake examined it briefly, shining his flashlight over the rusted metal. The blast had happened days ago. Among the debris, something small glinted, a silver fragment, half buried. He brushed the sand away and found a piece of a medical insignia, scorched at the edge. His pulse quickened. "She's alive," he whispered. "She has to be." Shadow barked once, softly but urgently, as if confirming. Jake pocketed the badge carefully. He looked east again, where the wind carried the faintest echo of human voices. Somewhere beyond the dunes, someone was speaking English, and fear. He crouched low, eyes narrowed. 2 clicks, maybe 3, he murmured. "You think we can make it before dawn?" Shadow gave a single short huff. Jake smiled grimly. "Didn't think so. But we'll try anyway." The moon sank lower, leaving them in half darkness. The sand hissed beneath their boots and paws, whispering secrets only the desert understood. Jake felt the ache in his chest again, not just from the cold, but from the strange pull of fate. He didn't know this woman, this nurse, but her name haunted him now. Lucy Adams. It sounded fragile, human, something worth saving in a world that had forgotten how. Back in the ruined village, Lucy was left alone in a corner of the courtyard, her hands tied behind her back, guarded by Yusuf. The boy's rifle lay across his lap, untouched. He looked at her, then away, his jaw tight. She could see the conflict inside him, loyalty and guilt tearing at each other. "You shouldn't have helped me," he muttered. "Now you die because of it." Lucy's voice was soft but steady. "Then help me one more time. Just look away when the sun rises." He didn't answer. The fire crackled low, shadows dancing over his scarred face. Somewhere beyond the dunes, a dog barked once, faint but real. Lucy's heart jolted. Yusuf heard it too, his head snapping toward the sound. "Just wind," he whispered, uncertain. But Lucy knew better. The desert had answered. As dawn crept across the sand, Rahim ordered the camera prepared. His men stood in a semicircle, rifles ready. Lucy was dragged to the center of the courtyard, the rising sun casting her long shadow across the blood-stained ground. She could barely stand, her body weak, but her gaze unbroken. Rahim lifted the camera and said to his men, "We begin." Miles away, Jake knelt behind a ridge overlooking the same village. He could see the faint light of torches below. He adjusted his scope, and his jaw clenched as he saw her, the nurse still alive. "Got you," he whispered. Shadow crouched beside him, silent but tense. The dog's ears perked. His muscles trembled with readiness. Jake whispered, "Hold steady, boy. The desert knows her name now. We find her before they bury it." And with that, they began their descent into the Valley of Shadows. The night over the desert was cold and windless, the kind of silence that magnified every sound, a breath, a heartbeat, a footstep over sand. Jake Walker lay flat on his stomach behind a crumbling ridge, binoculars pressed against his eyes. The village below was half ruins and half shadows, walls leaning like broken teeth against the moon. A few faint torches flickered in the distance, tracing the outlines of men with rifles. Then his gaze stopped. Inside one of the larger structures, dimly lit, Lucy Adams knelt beside a small figure. Even from this distance, Jake could see her pale face illuminated by the lantern light. Her blonde hair, tangled and dusty, glowed faintly like tarnished gold. Her wrists were still tied, but her hands moved with a healer's instinct, pressing bandages over the shoulder of a crying Iraqi child, no older than 10. The child's dark skin gleamed with fever, his arm swaddled in dirty cloth. Jake's jaw tightened. She was still helping people, even here, surrounded by men who saw her life as nothing but spectacle. He felt something twist deep in his chest, a long, dormant tenderness he hadn't allowed himself since the day Claire died. Beside him, Shadow crouched low, his breath a soft rhythm against the sand. The German shepherd's ears were forward, his amber eyes fixed on the same window. Jake lowered the binoculars and exhaled through his teeth. "She's alive," he whispered. Shadow's tail gave a slow, silent thump against the ground. Jake brushed the sand off his rifle, adjusted his scope, and counted silently. 3 guards visible, 1 at the east wall, 2 near the trucks. A few more unseen but moving. The camp wasn't heavily fortified, just desperate. Still, desperation made men unpredictable. He waited until full dark before moving, crawling across the dunes with the slow, deliberate patience that only years of war could teach. Jake felt the sand bite into his skin through his uniform. Shadow stayed low at his side, their movements synchronized, a living memory of training drills that had once taken place on safer ground. The smell of oil and old fire grew stronger as they approached the village perimeter. Jake stopped suddenly when Shadow froze. The dog's nose was to the ground, ears twitching. He gave a low, sharp grunt, his signal for danger. Jake followed his gaze and saw it. A faint glint of wire stretched across two rocks. Mines, old Soviet type, maybe rearmed by locals. His pulse spiked, but he smiled faintly. "Good catch, boy," he muttered. He marked the safe path with small stones, weaving through the traps until they reached the outer wall. The distant murmur of Arabic voices drifted from the courtyard. Rahim's men laughing around a fire. Jake leaned close to Shadow, whispered, "Stay low, silent mode." The dog seemed to understand, muscles tensing, eyes locked forward. Jake reached into his vest and pulled out a small scope, scanning again. There, two guards near the well, rifles slung carelessly. He lined up the first shot, exhaled, and squeezed. The silenced rifle whispered once, a puff of dust rising from the target's chest. The second guard turned, startled, and Jake fired again. Both bodies slumped soundlessly into Shadow. Moving fast, Jake reached the back of the main structure. He slipped inside through a torn section of wall. The smell hit him first, blood, sand, and antiseptic. His boots crunched on shattered glass. Inside, the light from a lantern revealed Lucy still kneeling beside the child. She was murmuring softly, her hands red but steady. The boy whimpered something in Arabic, and she hushed him gently. For a moment, Jake simply watched. Then Shadow brushed past him, nose to the air, sniffing for threats. Lucy's head snapped up at the faint sound of claws against the floor. Her eyes widened. She grabbed the nearest object, a metal tray, and hurled it toward the movement. It struck Jake squarely in the chest. He stumbled, swore under his breath, and instinctively raised his rifle. "Stop!" he hissed. But Lucy wasn't listening. She lunged toward him with surprising strength, screaming, "Get away from me!" She swung another tray, this one connected with his shoulder. Jake dropped his weapon, caught her wrist, and twisted, trying not to hurt her. They tumbled together onto the dirt floor, the lantern flickering wildly beside them. For a second, they froze like that, her struggling, him holding her down, both panting. Then she saw it. The patch on his vest. A faded Navy SEAL trident, silver and unmistakable. Her breath caught. You're real," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I thought God forgot me." Jake released her wrist immediately, backing off, lowering his head. "He didn't forget," he said quietly. "He sent me and my dog." For the first time since he had entered, she looked past him, at Shadow. The German shepherd stood a few feet away, his head low, eyes gentle. He gave a single soft bark, almost a greeting. Lucy's expression changed, something like disbelief melting into gratitude. She pressed a shaking hand over her mouth. "Oh my God," she murmured. "You actually came." Jake gave a tired half-smile. "You left breadcrumbs. That badge, it was yours, wasn't it?" She nodded weakly, tears streaking through the dust on her face. "I hid it. I thought maybe someone would find it when it was over." Jake crouched, checking the door. "It's not over yet." The small boy stirred beside her, looking between them. Jake noticed him properly now. Thin frame, dark curls, a smear of blood down his cheek. The same child she had been treating earlier. "Is he hurt bad?" Jake asked. Lucy shook her head. "Just shrapnel and fever. I couldn't leave him. He's not one of them." Jake nodded once. "Then we take him too." Before she could answer, Shadow's low growl cut through the silence. Jake froze, rifle up. A shadow passed the window outside, then another. Voices. Arabic. Close. He glanced at Lucy. "They heard something. We've got to move." She pushed herself to her feet, her body trembling from exhaustion. Jake handed her a small pistol from his belt. "Can you use it?" Her grip was firm despite her shaking hands. "I've seen enough blood to know where to point it." Jake allowed himself a small, grim grin. "That's all I need." He turned to Shadow, gesturing toward the back wall. "Scout exit." The dog darted forward, sniffing along the cracks. A sharp bark signaled the way, an opening half buried by rubble. Jake started clearing it with his knife. Outside, the voices grew louder, shouts now, someone calling Rahim's name. Lucy clutched the boy close. "He'll kill everyone if he finds out you're here." "Then let's not let him find out." Jake crouched low, motioning her through the gap. Shadow slipped out first, vanishing into the night. Lucy crawled through next, pulling the boy behind her. Jake followed, emerging into the narrow alley behind the building. The night air hit them cold and sharp. He scanned left and right, then stopped. Standing a few meters away was Yusuf, the young fighter. The boy's face was pale beneath the torchlight, his rifle hanging loose in his hands. His burn scar caught the glow, twisting as he clenched his jaw. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Lucy stepped forward. "Yusuf," she whispered, "please." The young man's eyes darted to Jake, then to Shadow, then back to her. He looked terrified, conflicted. "Go," he whispered hoarsely. "You don't have long. Rahim is coming." Lucy blinked. "Why are you helping us?" Yusuf's expression hardened. "Because you helped me. That's all." He stepped aside, gesturing toward the outer dunes. "Go before I change my mind." Jake gave a curt nod. "Good man." They moved fast, slipping past him into the open desert. Behind them, the village erupted with shouts. Gunfire cracked the night. Jake threw an arm around Lucy's shoulder to steady her as they ran. Shadow led the way, darting ahead, barking once, a signal that the path was clear. The child clung to Lucy, his sobs lost in the roar of chaos. As they reached the edge of the dunes, Lucy stumbled, collapsing to her knees. Jake grabbed her under the arms, hauling her up. "Keep moving," he urged. "We're not safe yet." She looked up at him, breathless, eyes full of tears and grit. "Why?" she whispered. "Why come for me?" Jake hesitated, then said simply, "Because someone once waited for me, and I never made it back." He looked toward the rising dawn, faint light bleeding into the horizon. "I'm not making the same mistake twice." They kept moving, silhouettes fading into the desert's pale dawn. The desert had turned to ash and wind. Every dune, every shadow seemed to move with the pulse of danger. Jake Walker trudged forward, carrying Lucy's weight over his shoulder, his breath short and shallow beneath the black horizon. The little Iraqi boy clung to Lucy's torn sleeve, silent, eyes wide with exhaustion and fear. Shadow moved ahead, nose close to the ground, leading them through a labyrinth of rocks until the faint silhouette of an ancient structure appeared, a collapsed temple buried halfway in sand. Its once grand pillars jutted toward the sky like broken fingers, and the wind howled through the cracks with a low, mournful tone, as though the desert itself was remembering prayers long forgotten. Jake stumbled to the entrance, lowering Lucy carefully onto the stone floor. She winced, clutching her right leg. Blood seeped through the bandage tied hastily around her calf. Her face was pale, lips cracked, but her green eyes still held their stubborn fire. "I can walk," she muttered, even though she clearly couldn't. Jake gave her a look, one part stern, one part weary amusement. "Yeah," he said softly, "and I'm the Pope." He knelt beside her, pulling a small med kit from his pack. The dim beam of his flashlight swept over her wound, a deep gash, probably from a piece of debris when they escaped the village. His hands were rough, calloused from years of war, but he worked with care, cutting away the torn fabric of her pant leg and disinfecting the wound. She flinched at the sting but didn't make a sound. "Hold still," he murmured. "It's not deep enough to kill you, but it'll hurt like hell." The boy, too frightened to sit still, hovered near the wall, his thin frame shaking with cold. Jake finally looked at him, really looked. The child had large brown eyes, a small scar across his forehead, and a layer of dust covering his face. He couldn't have been older than 10. His name, Lucy had told him earlier between gasps of pain, was Amir. He had no one left. His parents had died months before in a bombing. "Hey, kid," Jake said gently, nodding toward the far corner. "You stick close to the dog. He's better company than me." Amir hesitated, then crept toward Shadow, who lay down near the broken archway. The German shepherd's fur, black and tan, gleamed faintly in the lantern light. Despite the grime and dried blood from earlier battles, the dog's amber eyes were alert, watchful. He tilted his head as Amir approached, then let out a soft chuff. The boy sat beside him cautiously. Within minutes, Shadow rested his chin on Amir's leg, and the child began to stroke his fur, as if the steady warmth might keep nightmares away. Jake watched them for a moment before turning back to Lucy. He tightened the bandage around her leg and said quietly, "You're lucky." "Bullet missed the artery," Lucy tried to smile. "Luck doesn't seem to like me much lately." Jake sat back on his heels, rolling his sore shoulders. He was bone tired. The storm outside picked up, sand scraping across the stone like whispers of the dead. "We'll rest here until morning," he said, scanning the dark corners of the ruin. "Then we move west. I've got a contact near Ramadi who owes me a favor." Lucy leaned her head against the wall, her hair falling loose over her face. The lines of fatigue and pain softened her features, but there was something luminous beneath them. Resilience, quiet faith. "You sound like a man who doesn't believe in luck," she murmured. Jake smirked faintly. "I believe in what I can see." "And what do you see now?" He paused, looking out at the storm through the cracked doorway. The wind had begun to wail louder, echoing through the columns like a choir of lost souls. "A whole lot of trouble," he said, "and a woman who doesn't know when to quit." Lucy's laugh was faint but real. "Takes one to know one." He gave her a canteen. She drank slowly, then handed it back, her eyes softening. "You've seen too much of this, haven't you?" Jake didn't answer right away. He sat down beside her, stretching out his legs, staring at the floor where the dust gathered in uneven swirls. "Too much of everything," he said finally. "Too many missions that went wrong. Too many faces I couldn't save." His voice dropped. "I tell myself it's duty. But sometimes I wonder if I'm just running from ghosts." Shadow lifted his head, ears twitching, sensing the heaviness in his master's tone. Jake reached down, scratching behind the dog's ear. "I don't know if I'm saving her," he whispered, almost to himself, "or if she's saving me." The words carried softly through the ruined chamber. Lucy stirred. She had been half asleep, but those words reached her. She opened her eyes, the faintest smile curving her lips. In the dim light, she could see Jake silhouetted against the doorway, shoulders broad, face tired but resolute, a man still at war with his own heart. "Sometimes," she said quietly, her voice barely a breath, "healing means letting someone else carry your pain." Jake turned, surprised she'd heard him. Their eyes met in the gloom, two souls carved by the same kind of sorrow. For a heartbeat, neither spoke. Then Lucy's hand moved weakly toward his chest, fingers brushing against the chain around his neck. The small silver cross she had glimpsed earlier glinted faintly. "You still wear it," she murmured. Jake nodded. "Wasn't mine to take off." She understood. He didn't need to say Claire's name. The air between them was heavy with unspoken grief, but also something else, the fragile warmth of shared humanity. Outside, the storm reached its peak. The wind screamed through the cracks, thunder rumbling like artillery. Then came another sound, distant at first, but growing clearer. Engines, shouts. Lucy's eyes widened. "They've found us." Jake moved instantly, all fatigue gone. He snatched his rifle, checked the magazine. "Rahim's men," he muttered. "He must have tracked the blood trail." Shadow stood, every muscle tense, fur bristling. Amir woke with a start, clutching the dog's neck. Jake gestured sharply. "Stay behind the altar stone, both of you." Lucy grabbed his wrist as he passed her. "You can't fight them all." "I don't plan to," he said grimly, pulling away. "I just need to slow them down." He moved to the temple entrance, crouching behind a half-buried column. The faint orange glow of torches appeared through the storm, flickering between dunes. Voices shouted orders in Arabic, Rahim's voice among them, unmistakable, cold as iron. "Find them! Bring me their heads!" Lucy's breath caught. Her heart pounded as she turned toward the altar, whispering a prayer she didn't have time to finish. "God, not him too." Jake raised his rifle, steady hands despite the shaking wind. Shadow growled softly, ready to charge on command. The desert outside exploded into chaos, bullets slicing through the dark, sparks flying off stone. Jake fired back, methodical, precise, every shot a refusal to surrender. Sand whipped through the air, lightning flashing across the horizon. Lucy pressed Amir's head against her shoulder, whispering to calm him. Each explosion of gunfire felt like the world itself tearing apart. Through it all, Jake's silhouette held firm at the door, a lone figure against the storm. Not just a soldier, but a man standing between death and the last fragile light of faith. The world had become nothing but noise and sand. The storm screamed like a living thing, its voice blending with the crack of gunfire and the metallic clang of bullets ricocheting off ancient stone. Jake Walker crouched behind the crumbling altar, his rifle pressed to his shoulder, eyes narrowed against the sting of grit and smoke. Every instinct in him screamed to move, to fight, to survive. But his heart was somewhere behind him, where Lucy knelt clutching a trembling Amir against the cold floor, whispering prayers between sobs. Shadow was a blur of motion, a black and tan ghost slicing through the chaos. The German Shepherd, 6 years old and battle-scarred, darted from cover to cover with uncanny precision. His muscles rippled under his coat as he lunged at a gunman crawling over the sand mound near the temple entrance. A strangled cry pierced through the storm, then silence. Jake reloaded, fingers shaking from adrenaline and blood loss. "Two left," he muttered to himself, though he wasn't sure anymore. The storm had turned visibility into a cruel joke. His shoulder burned, a fresh wound, hot and deep. A bullet had grazed through muscle earlier when he shielded Lucy. He could still feel the wet warmth seeping through his sleeve, the iron scent of his own blood mixing with the desert air. But pain was a luxury. It meant he was still alive. Lucy, pale and streaked with dust, tore a strip from her sleeve and pressed it to his wound. "You're hit," she said, voice trembling but firm. Jake didn't look at her. "Stay down." He fired again, muzzle flash lighting the shadows for a split second. Another scream from the dunes, one less monster. From the far side of the temple, Rahim emerged, tall, lean, face carved in anger and cruelty. His thick beard was streaked with gray dust, his dark eyes burning with fanatic purpose. The man had once been a medic before war, twisted him into something else, something that fed on vengeance. His voice rose above the storm. "You think you can take her from me, American? She is proof your God bleeds just like ours." Jake's jaw clenched. He ducked as bullets shredded the pillar beside him, stones splintering into his face. "Shadow!" he shouted. The dog answered instantly, a low growl that cut through the wind. Shadow bolted into the open, weaving between gunfire, heading straight for the men circling from the east. His teeth flashed white against the storm-dark sky. He hit one man low, knocking him backward, and turned on the second before the first even hit the ground. The sound of his snarl was feral, primal, the kind that made even trained soldiers hesitate. Jake used the distraction, popping up to shoot. 2 shots, precise. Both men fell. The silence that followed was temporary, eerie, filled with the moan of wind through the broken temple. Then Rahim's laughter cut through it, sharp and ragged. He stepped into view, rifle slung low, something small and round gleaming in his left hand. "You fight like a man who has nothing left to lose," he called out. "Let's see if that includes your faith." Jake's stomach dropped. The pin clicked, that unmistakable metallic snap. "Grenade!" "Down!" Jake roared, throwing himself toward Lucy and Amir, but before he could even cover them, a blur of movement crossed his vision. Shadow. The dog launched forward, a streak of muscle and loyalty, his body slamming into the grenade midair. Time fractured. For one impossible heartbeat, everything was still. The grenade tumbling in Shadow's jaws, his eyes locking with Jake's one last time, calm and unwavering. Then came the explosion. A thunderclap tore the air apart. The blast lit up the temple like lightning. The shockwave threw Jake backward into the wall. His ears rang. His vision went white. Sand and blood rained from the ceiling. When he blinked back the haze, the first thing he saw was Shadow's body. Still, twisted, smoke rising from the scorched fur. "Shadow!" Jake's voice broke. He crawled across the rubble, ignoring the pain screaming in every nerve. He reached the dog's side, pulling him close. The fur was warm but cooling fast. Jake pressed a hand against Shadow's chest, searching. One faint heartbeat, then none. Lucy's scream tore through the storm. She tried to reach them, but debris blocked her path. "Jake!" He didn't answer. He was holding Shadow's head in his lap, his blood-streaked fingers trembling as they brushed the dog's muzzle. "You did it, boy," he whispered. "You saved them." His tears mixed with dust, carving clean streaks down his face. Outside, the desert wind howled louder, as if mourning. The sandstorm thickened, turning the world into a red, furious blur. Even Rahim paused, his expression faltering for the briefest moment at the sight, the man and his fallen dog, framed by the wreckage of faith and fury. Then Jake's head snapped up. The grief in his eyes had become something colder, harder. He laid Shadow gently on the ground, his hand resting one last time on the dog's side. Then he stood, grabbed his rifle, and turned toward Rahim. "You shouldn't have done that," Jake said, voice low, steady, deadly calm. Rahim raised his weapon, shouting something in Arabic that was lost to the storm. They fired at the same time. Jake felt the impact, another bullet grazing his ribs, but he didn't stop. His shot hit home. Rahim stumbled backward, clutching his chest. The light in his eyes went out before he hit the sand. Jake staggered, half-conscious, blood running down his arm. He turned, his knees buckling. Lucy caught him before he hit the ground. "No, no, stay with me," she cried, pulling him close. He smiled weakly. "You see? Even the storm's crying for him." His voice faded as the thunder rolled overhead. Lucy dragged him back behind the altar, her hands trembling as she opened the medkit. The wind outside roared like grief given form. She tore his vest open. His chest was bleeding badly, shrapnel embedded near his shoulder. "Don't you dare leave me now," she whispered fiercely, working with desperate speed. Her hands were covered in blood, his and hers. She used every scrap of medical training, packing the wound, clamping the bleeding, ignoring the ache in her leg. Her breath came in short bursts, panic fighting against resolve. Amir, crying silently, handed her what she needed: gauze, saline, adrenaline. The child's face was streaked with dirt and tears, but his hands didn't shake. "Good boy," Lucy murmured, without looking up. "Keep helping me." The storm outside began to fade, the thunder dying into a distant rumble. The silence that followed felt too large, too empty. Lucy's tears finally spilled over, dropping onto Jake's face as she leaned down, whispering shakily, "He gave his life for us. I won't let you die, too." Jake's eyes fluttered open, glassy but alive. For a moment, he didn't speak. His gaze drifted toward the doorway, where Shadow's body lay half-covered in sand, his form already blending into the desert, loyal even in death. Then Jake exhaled, a weak smile forming. "He'd want us to keep going," he whispered. Lucy cradled his head in her lap, rocking slightly as the last grains of sand fell from the air. "Rest now," she murmured. "The storm's over." But the desert did not rest. It carried the echo of a single bark, distant, fading, as if somewhere, beyond the veil of wind and death, Shadow still kept watch. The first light that broke over the desert was soft and golden, a mercy after days of rage and sand. The dunes were no longer screaming, they only whispered, carrying the last echoes of battle across a silence too vast to name. Inside the ruined temple, Lucy Adams sat with Jake's head resting in her lap, her fingers trembling as they brushed the dust from his bloodied face. He was pale, barely breathing, each shallow rise of his chest a fight against the dark. Around them, the wind sighed through the cracks in the stone, moving Shadow's tag where it lay against the sand. The metal plate, scorched and blackened at the edges, glinted weakly as if refusing to be forgotten. Lucy reached out and clutched it in her fist, holding it to her heart. Hours passed, or maybe days. Time had lost its meaning in that timeless desert. Then, at last, the distant thump of helicopter blades rose like a heartbeat against the morning sky. Lucy blinked against the light as a shape grew larger above the dunes. A rescue chopper, marked with the insignia of the U.S. Special Operations Unit. A voice crackled over a loudspeaker. "This is Commander Ethan Hall. Hold position." The aircraft descended, kicking up another storm of dust. Soldiers poured out, their silhouettes sharp and purposeful. Ethan Hall, a tall man in his late 40s, strode ahead of them, his helmet tucked under one arm. His face was weathered and angular, the kind that carried too many sleepless nights and too many orders given with regret. His dark blonde hair was streaked with gray, and a jagged scar crossed his left cheek, souvenir from a raid years ago gone wrong. He was Jake's old commanding officer, a man hardened by responsibility but softened by loyalty. When he saw the bodies in the temple, the fallen dog, the unconscious soldier, the woman holding them both, something in his expression cracked. He knelt beside Lucy, speaking over the roar of the rotors. "Lieutenant Adams, I'm Commander Hall. We've got you now." Lucy looked up, her eyes hollow but steady. "He needs help," she rasped. "He saved us all." Hall signaled his medics immediately. "Get a stretcher over here, and someone cover that." He stopped mid-sentence when he noticed Shadow's body. For a moment, the war-worn commander simply bowed his head. "Good boy," he murmured under his breath, before standing again. Jake's stretcher was lifted into the chopper. Lucy refused to let go of his hand until Hall himself helped her inside. As the helicopter rose, the temple below vanished into a blur of gold and dust. The desert that had nearly claimed them now shimmered like a sea of light. Lucy looked down at the small metal tag still in her palm, the half-burned name barely visible, Shadow, Service K9. Her tears finally came, quiet and unrestrained, as the wind carried the last echo of a bark that would never return. 3 months later, the sky over North Carolina was a gentle blue, soft clouds drifting over fields of wild grass. The war was thousands of miles away, yet it lingered in small ways, inside the hospital wards, the quiet corners of rehabilitation centers, and the haunted eyes of veterans learning how to live again. Lucy Adams had chosen not to return to the Army. Instead, she poured her savings, her grief, and her healing into a new place, Shadow's Promise Clinic. The clinic stood on the edge of a quiet town, a renovated farmhouse painted white with blue shutters. The sign at the gate read in simple lettering, "For those who fought and those who waited." Inside, the halls smelled faintly of antiseptic and cedar wood. The walls were covered with photos of soldiers and dogs, pairs of eyes that had once stared down hell together. Some of the dogs limped. Some had one eye, but they all lived, trained, and healed here. Lucy moved down the corridor in her white coat, her hair shorter now, still golden, but with silver streaks of stress. She walked with a slight limp, the wound in her leg never quite healed, but her spirit had found new strength. Every morning, she treated veterans with shrapnel scars and therapy dogs relearning trust. To her, each patient was a new prayer answered. At the far end of the hall, a doorbell chimed. She turned and froze. Jake Walker stood in the doorway, framed by the afternoon sun. His uniform was gone. He wore a simple flannel shirt and jeans, but his presence still carried that unspoken weight of command. His face was leaner, rougher, short beard now peppered with gray, and the scar near his temple had faded into a pale reminder of what he'd survived. His right shoulder was wrapped under his shirt. The bullet wound healed but stiff. Despite the pain, there was a spark in his blue-gray eyes that hadn't been there before. Peace. Lucy smiled softly, disbelief and joy warring on her face. "Jake." He gave a small nod, a half-smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Heard you were running a place for lost causes." She laughed, a sound that felt like sunlight after rain. "Only the best kind." Jake stepped inside, holding something in his arms. Wrapped in a soft blanket was a small German Shepherd puppy, barely 6 months old. The pup squirmed playfully, its fur a mirror of shadows, black and tan, eyes wide and intelligent. Jake lowered it onto the floor, and it immediately padded toward Lucy, tail wagging furiously. She knelt down, tears welling up as she scooped the puppy into her arms. "Where did you find him?" she whispered. Jake's voice softened. "From Shadow's line. They were training a new litter at the base. I asked for this one." He looked away briefly, his jaw tightening with emotion. "He came back, just like we did." Lucy pressed her forehead to the puppy's, laughing through tears. "Welcome home, little one." The pup licked her cheek, tail thumping against her arm. For a moment, the ghosts faded, the desert, the storm, the loss, and all that remained was warmth. Jake walked farther into the clinic, his eyes scanning the photos on the wall. At the center hung a framed picture, the one taken by the rescue team weeks after their return. It showed 3 figures standing against the sandstorm's fading light. A soldier with his rifle, a nurse in torn fatigues, and a dog whose gaze faced the horizon. Below it, engraved into a metal plate, were the words, "Some angels wear uniforms. Some have paws." Jake reached out and touched the frame gently. "He'd like it here," he said. Lucy looked up, her eyes shining. "He already does." The light from the window fell across them, warm and golden, the same color as the desert sunrise that once marked their survival. But this time, the dawn didn't pass. It lingered, soft and still, wrapping them in peace that neither had dared to believe possible. Outside, the puppy barked once, sharp and bright, like a promise reborn. And for the first time in years, both Jake and Lucy smiled without pain. Sometimes God's miracles don't come with thunder or light. Sometimes they arrive in the quiet loyalty of a dog, in the courage of a soldier who refuses to give up, or in the hands of a woman who still believes love can heal. In a world torn by chaos, faith can still build bridges, because even in the darkest deserts, God never leaves us. He sends angels in uniforms, and sometimes angels with paws. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs hope today. Comment Amen if you believe that faith still saves lives. And don't forget to subscribe, because here we keep telling stories where light wins, love heals, and miracles never stop happening. May God bless you, your family, and every loyal soul still fighting their silent battles.